called.
Hello and welcome to the Somerset Archaeological and Natural History Society, which is commonly called SANHS. My name's Lizzie Induni and I'm a trustee for SANHS. This evening we're going to be hearing a lecture about the wildlife of Shetland by Matt Eade. Matt grew up in East Sussex and his interest in the natural world began when he was 7 years old. He started studying birds, then butterflies, dragonflies and orchids, which are still his main wildlife interests. In 2011, he went on his first birding trip to South Africa, and since then, he's travelled to all 7 continents. He'll soon be going on an expedition from New Zealand to Japan and calling on many remote islands in between. Despite this foreign travel, Shetland has always captivated Matt, and barely a year goes by without 1 or 2 visits to this wind-blown archipelago. Being very familiar with the island's wildlife and historical values, Matt's going to give us an introductory insight into these ancient islands and the wildlife one can expect to see there. In today's lecture, to make things simple, Matt will take questions at the end of the talk. To ask questions, you'll need to activate the chat button at the bottom of the page and type in a question. To find the button, just run your mouse over the bottom of your screen and a series of buttons should pop up. If the button's not there, it might be at the top right or even under 3 dots. Because we're recording this lecture, we won't use names in the question time. It's free to register for the talks, but a donation of £5 towards the ongoing costs of SANHS would be greatly appreciated. The donations button is on the SANHS website donations page. When donating, please label your donation Shetland. To make things easier, a link to the donations page will be posted on the chat button at the end of the lecture. So, over to Matt.
Okay, that's great, Lizzie. Thank you very much for that fine introduction, and thank you, SANHS, for having me along this evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And yes, my name is Matt, and I've been interested in the Shetlands ever since my first visit in 2012. I currently live in North Hampshire, so quite a way away from Shetland, and I work at a Nature Trek, a wildlife tour operator which operates tours all around the world and including Shetland. So I've been very lucky enough to have led quite a few tours around the archipelago in recent years, and also far and wide as well. But for the purpose of this evening, I'll be fully concentrating on Shetland. Okay, so let's crack on. Okay, so our itinerary, I do just have to mention this very briefly because I do work for Nature Trek. We offer a 9-day tour, and the purpose of this evening will be talking through this itinerary, but of course highlighting the wonderful wildlife highlights on the islands, as well as a few cultural highlights as well. But as you can see here, it's a 9-day tour, a few days on mainland, and then we slowly track north up to the Northern Isles, starting off from Fetlar and then eventually landing on the most northerly island in the UK of Unst. So how do we get there? It is an overnight ferry from Aberdeen to Lerwick. It's roughly 12 hours. So we do hope that the weather is rather favourable to us. Otherwise, it can be quite a long journey. But I have sailed across in a force 10 easterly in previous years. But thankfully, it's a very sturdy vessel and all was well in the end. Okay, so where are the Shetlands? As I'm sure you all know, very much in the North Sea and at some latitude as well, roughly the same as Oslo. So I can fully recommend that you visit not during the winter, the late autumn or late winter. You very much need to go in late spring, early summer to experience the very best wildlife and weather and 22 hours of daylight that Shetland has on offer. If you do wish to go in the winter, I wish you the very best of luck. Okay, so for the purpose of this evening, I will be focusing on the key arrow points here. So we're going to start off in the deep south at Sunborough, and then we're slowly going to make our way up to the north, stopping at the Isle of Noss, the Isle of Musa, a few sites in between, then slowly moving on to Fetla, and then eventually landing on Unst. Okay, so before I carry on with the wildlife, just a few facts on Shetland, which you may or may not know. So Shetland, along with Orkney, officially became Scottish in 1472, after being reigned by Norsemen for over 6 centuries. The longest day is roughly 18.5 hours, that's mid-June, mid to late June, whilst the shortest in deep December is just under 5.5 hours. So there we go, spring is the way forward. The human population is around 23,000, and the islands comprise roughly 100 islands altogether. And fewer than 20 are uninhabited, which is quite a low number considering how many islands there are. The main populations are on mainland, of course, and then numbers deplete suddenly between Yell, Unst, Walsay, and Bressay. And just a quick wildlife fact. And everyone's favourite bird for sure, the puffin. And of course, I will touch on these a bit later on, but there's around 50,000 breeding pairs of puffins on the islands. That's 100,000 individuals, which is quite amazing. Okay, so of course, around the islands, there's a beautiful archipelago. There are some absolutely fantastic sites, and probably no better site is this one here, and this is Eade Cliff. So this is on the northwest mainland. It's quite a long way to get to. It's a long minor road across the moors, but eventually you reach these beautiful steep-sided cliffs. And if you arrive there on a force 10 westerly, then you will be in for quite a shock because it is very exposed, as one can imagine, up here. But you know, the sight and the sounds of the waves crashing beneath you and the fulmars just swirling around the cliffs is quite a sight and sound to behold. And in fact, the edge of Eade is actually the remnants of a volcano, but obviously that is long gone, but as you can see from the colour of the rocks, this was once a very volcanic region. Okay, there are nice days on Shetland as well, you'll be pleased to hear. Look at that lovely blue sky, white sandy beaches. There we go, it's not all doom and gloom up north. But this is St. Ninian's Isle. This is in fact called a tombolo, this land feature here, and it joins mainland with St. Ninian's Isle. And the tombolo is formed basically where the waves push up all the sediment, and then no longer can the waves actually breach that sediment to move it on. Therefore, the two bits of land are joined. But this is just one of many unique features one can find when circumnavigating the archipelago. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on a few birds that you will 100% see if you visit Shetland. By no means I like to guarantee sightings, but just every now and then you have to, really. And that's only because these birds are very common. And of course, not very common down here where I am in Hampshire or in Somerset, of course. So we're going to start off with the black guillemot. This is generally a northern bird in across the British Isles, and you may just be able to see at the bottom left there through the water its distinct red legs and feet. And this is a bird molting into its summer plumage. So around February or March time, you would expect to see one in this plumage. Whereas in the summer, they actually molt to this beautiful black version. You can just see the red legs or red toes hanging out the wall there, and that's where they nest, in these wall cavities. And on Shetland, they're very common around the harbours. It's one of the first birds you see, in fact, when you visit. But they are a very pretty bird indeed. Now, the common eider, these are very common around the islands, especially in the autumn and winter, when large groups that have bred further north, around Scandinavia, the Varangerfjord area, they come south to join the resident birds that are spent all year on Shetland. So vast flocks form in the many voes and bays of Shetland, and intermixed with them can be the odd king eider as well. I've been up there a few times recently, and every time I've seen a king eider as well, so very exciting indeed. And now this beauty, the wonderful red-throated diver, an absolute superb bird, and these breed on Shetland. So Shetland, I find, is a very unique place, especially when you compare it with the rest of Britain. Has breeding birds that you would just not imagine on mainland. So if you go to Shetland, you will expect and you will see a different kind of avifauna, and it's just fascinating to watch and listen to as well. You hear during the nights, especially when it's low light in the summer, just the wailing calls of a variety of waders and, of course, red-throated divers as well. And these, red-throated divers, they breed on small lochans, and so they are very approachable indeed. Of course, we don't want to approach them too much due to disturbance, so you can see them from afar, but still obtain wonderful views. And the great northern diver, now this is probably the second commonest diver that you would encounter around Shetland, and this is a breeding adult, but it's not breeding, so it's in its breeding plumage, breeding finery, but it's just hanging around Shetland. So basically, it can't really be bothered to fly north. It's just hanging around Shetland, where it's just happily feeding all summer long. And during the winter, this bird will probably move south. But then the year after, it may well move further north to breed. But it's a superb bird, a very large, robust bird, and a beautiful neck collar as well. Superb. Okay, now Britain's smallest bird of prey, the merlin. Now these do breed in relatively good numbers on Shetland. And it's interesting to note that there are very few large raptors on the island, and that is mainly because of the food source. So merlins prey predominantly on meadowpipits, skylarks, so the small members of the passerine family, whereas species like buzzards, red kites, that are very common down this way, you just don't get them up north. Shorted owls, you don't get them up on Shetland, and that's just because the food source isn't available. So merlin is actually one of the most expected species one can see. Okay, now moving to the waders. So curlew, this is a common breed, a common winterer down south, and on Shetland, it's a common breeder. So these once bred in the south on the moors, but of course due to disturbance and many other factors, global warming being one of them, they're now very much a northern breeder, and Shetland is an excellent place to go and see them. And during the late spring, all night long, you can hear these wonderful birds giving off their superb calls. And a near relative of the curlew, the whimbrel, is also breeds on Shetland, but in far fewer numbers. And in fact, you have to go to the more remote islands or remote or very remote regions on the mainland to try and track down a whimbrel. But again, it just goes to show that you just can't imagine seeing a pair of whimbrel on a moorland in Britain breeding. So Shetland really is a unique place, and absolutely fascinating. And bizarrely, whooper swans are found all year round as well on the islands. Most super swans actually breed around Iceland or Greenland, but again, very much like the great northern diver seen earlier, numbers actually hold on during the summer months. And again, these are just non-breeding birds which won't fly north, and then as soon as autumn comes, they will move south to feed on the grasslands of southern England. And last but not least on the birds, and these are the birds, remember, that you're most expected to see on the islands. This is the Shetland wren. Now, as you can see, it's very much like a bog standard wren, but it's a much browner individual, much longer tailed. And when you hear the wren on Shetland, they are very different from the wrens that you hear down south, far more melodic, and they breed in the dry stone walls that are scattered across the islands, whereas down here, you I think you would rarely see them in a wall rather than in a bush where they breed down here. Okay, so just touching away from the birds briefly, if you want to see an otter in the UK, now Shetland is probably one of the best places to go to, outside of the Western Isles, at least. So this is an otter that I captured a few years ago. However, only half of the animal was visible during this, and that's because a fence post was running directly through the other half of the animal, which is very frustrating because it would have been a rather nice photo. But hey ho, but otters are very numerous across the islands, and they do show particularly well as well, very much like this individual. And it is just another otter in full view for a change, so showing off that long slim tail and the beautiful whiskers that this beautiful animal has. And just visiting any sheltered row around the archipelago, or even inland on an inland loch, you could well expect to see an otter. Okay, so just starting off now with the itinerary, which I showed you earlier. So we're going to start off down the south, and our first point of interest is Sumber Head, so the most southerly point on mainland Shetland. Now, this is pretty much the very tip of the island, and you can see from the cliffs here that they are very much sloping down into the water, and this creates the perfect breeding habitat for the puffin. So the puffins, you wouldn't necessarily find them on the steep-sided cliffs that the razorbills and guillemots are found during the breeding season. In fact, puffins really admire these slopes because they need a takeoff. They like a runoff to fly off, and they also like a nice landing pad as well. They don't like to land suddenly like all the other auks that reside on Shetland. They do like to run off their flight and straight into their burrows. So this is the reason why Sumber Head is an exceptional area to see the puffin. And there they are. Surely everyone's favourite bird, and they really are stunning. They show exceptionally well all around the island, not just at Sumber Head. In fact, Sumber Head just happens to be one of 3 key sites around the archipelago that has thousands of puffins, the Isle of Nos being one, and then up that far north at Hermanus is another site. But at Sumber, the most accessible for sure, and as I say, they can just walk around your feet, oblivious to the admiration shown to them. So a stunning bird, and no doubt the highlight of any wildlife visit to the island. Now, Sumber Head is actually an exceptional site to see cetaceans. Orca, it's really good for orca here. Not that I've seen one yet. But this chap, the Atlantic white-sided dolphin, their numbers are increasing year on year, which only goes to show that the food source is increasing. And it may well have something to do with global warming as well, who knows. But at least 10 species of cetacean can be seen on Shetland if you're very lucky. You do have to be lucky, but there is that potential there. And the Atlantic white-sided dolphin has potential to be seen, especially the further south you are on the island. Now, whilst you're at Sumber Head and the inland rows just around the corner from the head, you get Arctic terns, which show extremely well as they as they visit their nesting sites. Of course, the Arctic tern is one of the world's longest migratory birds. They winter in the Antarctic Circle, and then they breed up in around northern England, Shetland, of course, but predominantly in the Arctic Circle. So a massive journey they undertake twice a year. So quite a superb bird. But it's not all plain sailing for the Arctic tern, because not too far away, especially on Shetland, are the skewers. Now, these are the harassing birds that don't necessarily like to kill their prey. They just like to harass for their prey to regurgitate the contents that they have caught out at sea. So when the Arctic terns come in from the fishing forays, the Arctic skewers are there waiting for them, which is bad news for the Arctic tern, but yeah, that's life, sadly. And another threat the terns have to worry about is the beautiful and subtly marked long-tailed skewer. By far one of my most favourite birds, not just in the UK, but in the world. An absolute stunning bird. And there was a resident pair, then a resident individual the past few years. But unfortunately, that individual got caught up in all the bird flu saga. So unfortunately, that individual died last year. So Shetland is now without a long-tailed skewer, even if it was just one or two. So that's going to have to start all over again, sadly. But there is potential, at least for the future, for another long-tailed skewer to appear. Okay, so we're just going to move north slightly, and this is the beautiful Isle of Nos. So this is uninhabited, apart from during the summer months, when during the bottom left corner of the island, there's a small hut where a couple of RSPB staff live, and they're there to monitor the seabird population. Now, as you can see from this photo, your best bet to view the seabirds are, of course, the most furthest tip and highest point you can see on this picture. And that is where the seabirds will be, because it's pretty much unsuitable elsewhere. So the steep sided cliffs, and that is where on Nos you can see thousands upon thousands of gannets, razorbills, guillemots, and kittiwakes. It really is a beautiful sight, but I'm afraid the smell isn't ideal. So if you do have a peg, might be worth just taking one just for the short time that you are at the viewpoints on the Isle of Nos. But here we are. This is the view from one of the many viewpoints. I say viewpoints, they're just the edge of the cliff where you can get a good view of the Evercliffs. But you can see all the white markings on that around the center of the photo. They are all gannets. Pretty much all the white markings there are gannets, whereas guillemots and razorbills tend to blend in somewhat, of course being much smaller as well. But there's roughly 50,000 pairs of gannets on the Isle of Nos, so an exceptional number. And I say the cacophony of noise is rather staggering. And it's a beautiful sight as well, terrific view. And in fact, on our trips, we actually have access to a boat. So we get on the boat in Lerwick, and we actually take it to underneath the colony of the gannets. So you're in fact looking up at all the gannets toing and froing. So it's fantastic to get that different perspective on a seabird colony, rather than just seeing it from the land. So a lovely added bonus there. And just another viewpoint there. Very good place to try and spot cetaceans as well, of course, especially on a flat, calm day like that one is. Okay, so now we're just going to move north, so away from the seabird colonies for the time being, and probably to visit one of my most favourite islands on the archipelago. And that is for one very special bird. And if you ever go to Shetland in May, June or July, I thoroughly recommend that you go to the Isle of Musa. And that's just not to visit the Musa Brock, but it's to see one very special seabird that breeds on the island. So here is Musa Brock, standing approximately 13 meters tall, a very impressive structure. And you visit here of a late evening during the summer months, so it already has this eerie feel about it as you land, walk up the slipway, and then slowly make your way over to the Brock. And the reason for that is I will touch on that very shortly. So just a few facts on Moosa Brock to start us off with. It's thought to have been constructed in 300 BC, and as I said, it stands around 13 meters tall. It's just one of over 120 brocks found on Shetland, but trust me, it is the most magnificent of the brocks. Many are demolished, many don't exist anymore. They're known just by the name of the town, but the brock no longer stands. And there's one in the centre of Lurk as well, which is quite impressive, I must admit. But Moosa Brock is fantastic. And they're thought to have been made for refuges for communities and their livestock, which blends in well, especially when you are on Shetland and the weather isn't what you would hope. You can imagine that these brocks back in the day would have been the perfect place to ride out a storm. But the reason why we come to Moosa Brock as a wildlife trip at least is to see the beautiful European storm petrel, and around 400 pairs of petrels breed within this brock alone, whilst over 10,000 breed on the Isle of Moosa. Now, Moosa again is uninhabited like the Isle of Nos, yet the island is lined with dry stone walls, and that is where the storm petrels in fact breed. And here is that very storm petrel, a beautiful bird, and it's Europe's smallest seabird. So during the day, they head far out at sea to avoid the coastal predators such as gulls and skuas. So they head far out at sea where the gulls and skuas aren't, because there's just not enough food out there for them. And the storm petrels, they feed up and then under the cover of darkness. So it has to be pretty much pitch black. If you're there on a full moon, you have a much later night. So the birds come in around midnight or 1 a.m. So it's a very late night. But when they do, you are treated to the most magnificent sight as you stand right up against the 13-meter brock. You look up, and just whizzing around you like bats are these storm petrels, which have spent all their days out at sea. And I say it's just a very special moment, because it just doesn't happen anywhere else in the UK like this. It really is a unique experience, and I would thoroughly recommend that you head there. So that's the European storm petrel. You may just be able to notice actually on the bird's bill, there's a small, what we call tube nose on the upper mandible there near the base of the forehead, and that is for two things: for salt extraction of the seawater, and also for scent, to smell the food which is far out at sea. And it's an incredible sense of smells that can be smelt up to 6 or 7 miles away. So very impressive indeed. And there we go. That is me standing at the bottom of the rock, looking up, and eventually the European stormies will come in. So that's the Isle of Moosa, a superb sight, and as I say, I thoroughly recommend it. Now, as we head north to the Isle of Fetler, we do stop off in central mainland at the only wooded part of the island, the only place where there are tall sycamore trees, pretty much, and that is a name that escapes me now, but that small plantation holds the only jackdaw and rook populations on the island. So if you are a keen birder and you want to get your bird list up on Shetland, then you've got to head to the trees. But the majority of Shetland is treeless, and that is mainly down to the many sheep which reside on the islands, keeping all the vegetation nice and low. Okay, so we're now going to move to the Isle of Fetler. This is probably one of my most favourite islands, mainly because it's so remote, very few people live there, and I also had some exceptional wildlife experiences on the island as well. So this is the Isle of Fetler, and that is the main road. There's one road which runs through the island, and that is it. So no busy rush hour, no kids not being late for work. Not that there's much to do on the island, but there we go. That's the joy of being on Shetland. It's just a wonderful place, and especially on Fetler, it's just so remote. You can just listen to the bird song, or the sounds of the wind all day. It really is very special indeed. And as you can see, the views are rather exceptional as well. And if you're very lucky, you can get some superb cetacean sightings from here as well. Now, Fetlar, I find, is nowhere else like it on Shetland in terms of the breeding waders, because it is so remote. Waders just pop up in the most unlikely of places. So this common redshank, for example, was just on a roadside fence post, and this is where it sits and calls mostly all day to try to attract a mate. So the higher up birds are, of course, the more their sound penetrates across the land. So you mainly actually see many species of waders on fence posts, like this chap. Whilst overhead, you can get drumming snipes. So this is a common snipe, and they breed in very good numbers on Shetland, and especially on Fetlar. And they have this incredible aerial display, which can last up to half an hour or even an hour at a time, which must be extremely exhausting for the bird. And what they do is they rise up to quite an altitude, and they suddenly drop and they release. You may just be able to see it between the tail and the wing, this single feather which pops out, and this creates a magnificent drumming sound, it's called, as the bird descends sharply. And they make this descent 3 or 4 times in one long descent before rising back up again and repeat. And I was watching this one individual for at least half an hour. So it must have been quite exhausted by the end, but it really is, again, just another unique experience that one can encounter on the islands. And there we go, there's even time for a spot of lunch on a nice white sandy beach, almost clear blue sky, clear blue waters. You could easily not be on Shetland in this image. So there's not only plenty of wildlife opportunities, there's also plenty of opportunities to absorb the sun rays that are least expected up here. Now, Fetlar is most famous for, in my eyes, for its waders. This is a species of wader, which I mentioned just now, but this is the red-necked phalarope, an extraordinary bird and tiny as well. And why that has significance is that it's only recently that this species has been found in its wintering quarters, like this population at least. So a bird was tagged, satellite tagged, and it was tracked wintering on the eastern Pacific, so to the west of Ecuador, pretty much. Now that is a very, very long journey. Yes, they can land on the water and feed off insects which have dropped onto the surface of the water, yet that is an incredible journey for a bird that, if you were to hold out your hand, it would quite easily fit on your hand. So it's a tiny bird, yet can easily travel thousands of miles to its wintering quarters and return again in the same year to breed. So it really is a magnificent bird. And although my photo here doesn't do it much justice, this one does. So red-necked phalarope, an absolutely beautiful bird. And yeah, not really too much else I can say about that, apart from, yeah, you must go to Fetlar and see it, because it is rather incredible. Okay, so as I said, the islands is not only great for its birds, but it can be a very good lookout for cetaceans as well. And as I mentioned at the start of the talk, you could see up to 10 species of cetacean if you're very lucky. Like, trust me, you've got to be very lucky around the islands. But we're going to start off here with the smallest, and that is the harbour porpoise. So these form usually small pods and are best seen when the water is very calm, only because of the size of the animal. They are small, as UK's smallest cetacean. So calm waters are by far the best to see this animal. But the very small, short, triangular dorsal fin is the best giveaway that you're onto a harbour porpoise. And in fact, this photo portrays just what you will see on a porpoise. You rarely see the head, you rarely see the tail. So this is pretty much it of what you're going to see from this cetacean. Okay, next up, the Risso's dolphin, not regularly encountered around the islands, but when I was on Fetla a couple of years ago in June, we came across a rather large pod of this very attractive animal as they were just moving north. So they have a very large dorsal fin, and it did catch me by surprise that when I first laid eyes on this pod, I saw the dorsal fin and I immediately went into panic, thinking that I was onto a pod of orca. Sadly, they were the Risso's dolphin and not the orca, which became quite clearly evident when they got closer to me. But you can see all the scratch marks on this animal. So this animal is almost certainly a male, and this is more down to mating behavior or territorial behavior, but also rubbing on rocks on the ocean floor as well can cause this. Not so much for the Rissos, but there is potential for that as well. But it is mainly mating behavior, a male on male, a territorial show. So that's how this animal is classed as a male, whereas the females are usually uniform dark grey all over, but a very attractive animal for sure. Okay, this chap, a rather awful photo. Unfortunately, my camera focused on the sea behind, but if you can use your imagination, this is a minke whale. Not often encountered. You've got to be lucky to see a minke in Shetland waters, but I have seen them on the odd occasion now. And again, you're just very much hoping for calmer waters. But their numbers are increasing year on year around the archipelago. So you've just got to give it time, and eventually, hopefully, a minke will come by. Now, the minke whale is very similar, in fact, to the fin whale, but the fin whales are much larger, the second largest whale in the world, whereas the minke is much smaller, and their role is a bit different as well. But there is a potential for fin as well. And probably what everyone wants to go and see on Shetland, if you're into cetaceans, that is the mighty orca, and an absolute incredible beast. And this is a bald orca, shown by that very straight isosceles triangle dorsal fin. And pods do roam these islands annually, and usually for a prolonged spell of time as well. And usually around June, July, August, and October, November are probably the best times of year to see a pod of orca. But the amount of times I have been to Shetland, I'm yet to in fact see one there. So this was taken elsewhere, but pods do occur. But even if you are on the islands, like I have been, they could show up at one end of the island. By the time you've raced up there, they've gone south or just disappeared off into the ocean. So they are very tricky. They are there, but you do have to be lucky for sure. But what a sighting if you do get to see one. Okay, so we're going to end the talk, the final 7 minutes up on the Isle of Unst. So this is UK's most northerly island, and we do have the opportunity to hike all the way up to the north to view the most northerly point of the UK, which is Muckle Flugga Lighthouse. And the Isle of Unst is superb in my eyes. It's very remote again, the population is very low, and the island is quite large. So you barely see anyone. The Vaux are absolutely spectacular. The water is usually always calm, even if the wind is blowing in the Vaux, because the Vaux are so deep. Superb otter habitat you can see here on the sides of the Vaux. And it really is just a beautiful place. And if you are there on a very lovely day, then it will prove to be one of the highlights of your trip up north. Okay, long-tailed ducks, these can be seen with some regularity on the islands. There's some here in their winter and breeding plumage. And this photo was taken in the autumn. So the birds in transitional plumages there, but a beautiful duck showing there. That the bottom right bird, the lovely long tail, and the pink blob on the bill as well. But Unst is probably most famous for its great skua population, or the bonksy, as the locals refer it as. And unfortunately, due to the recent bird flu events. Their population is now unknown for this year. We will have to wait and see for this year's breeding season just to see how much they were affected during last year. But it is thought that around 85% of the great squirrel population, not just on Shetland, but in the UK, has been depleted, has gone basically, which is an extinction level type depletion. So we will have to wait and see this year just to see how the breeding population is. And of course, the bird flu hasn't just affected the great skewers, it's affected the gannets, the puffins, and so forth. So yeah, it's not good news, and Shetland was hit really hard last year. But anyway, on better news. So as I said just now, we do get to hike up to the very north of the island, and that is to the point of Hermanus National Nature Reserve. And you get to the top. It's roughly a 45-minute walk, initially a boardwalk, and then you're on open land. But you get to this spectacular viewpoint to view the many thousands of gannets which breed here. And that is Muckleflugger Lighthouse on the top right, the most northerly point in the UK. And it really is a spectacular location. And it's not just the gannets here, you've got the puffins which wander around your feet again. So these breed on the grassy burrows right on the top of the cliffs. You are very high here. You definitely don't want to look down if you have vertigo or anything. You're very high. So stay away from the cliffs and admire the puffins instead if you don't wish to get too close. Okay, I'm just going to show you this video, and hopefully it gives you a good example of what one can expect to see when you look over the edge and to the vastness below, and all you see is just these swirling gannets beneath you. And as you can see on the right-hand side, there's a couple of puffins as well. There we go. That just gives you an idea of the number of birds involved when you hike up, and it is certainly worth the hike. And not only for the gannets, but for the puffins as well, of course. Over 25,000 pairs of puffins breed at Hermanus alone, which is a staggering number. You don't actually get to see that many because they're spread so far along the cliff top, but they are there, and you will get very good views of them. And you can get just the classic puffin photos that you've dreamt of all your life. It really is fantastic. Oh my goodness, what is that? Right. As mentioned in the introduction, I do have a passion for orchids as well. And believe it or not, Shetland does have some orchids, 4 species, in fact. And this is by far the smallest. So if you were to hold up your little finger, because things grow even shorter on Shetland because of the habitat and the local weather, species such as this lesser Twayblade grow even smaller than they otherwise would do on mainland UK, and they are a tiny orchid anyway. But if you are lucky, you may well get to see a lesser Twayblade amongst all the heather. That's where they like to grow. And there is a good population on Shetland. It's just finding the things because they are so small and they blend in perfectly to the background. So that's the lesser Twayblade and can be seen in May or June. The Heath spotted orchid as well, and again down south these can grow up to a foot high, whereas on Shetland you're lucky if you'll get 10 centimeters out of it. And before I move on to this chap, I'll just move back. There are 2 other species of orchids which grow: the northern marsh orchid, which is probably the commonest on the island, and also the frog orchid too, which is a tiny orchid and quite hard to find as well. But there is one site on Unst where quite a few of these orchids and the rare flowers I'm just about to show you grow as well. So this is the Edmonsons chickweed, or the Shetland mouse ear. So the name suggests it is an endemic plant to the island, and it is found in only one tiny location on the Isle of Unst. So if you are into your botany, there's a site just north of Bolter Sound where you can go to try and find these flowers, but please take your magnifying glass because it is not easy at all. And this chap as well, I must admit, I'm an orchid enthusiast. I'm not a wildflower enthusiast. This may be the reason why, who knows, but this is a mood word for those of you that are interested. And again, another rarity. And speaking of rarities, Shetland is renowned for its rare birds. And over the years, there's been a whole assortment of fantastic rarities which turn up, and that's why people flock there in the autumn. That's the best time of year to go and view or try and see these rare birds. However, this was in June, and you may have spotted it, you may not have spotted it, but pretty much in the centre of the image, there is a snowy owl. Now, snowy owls, of course, once bred on Shetland. Back in the 70s, they bred on Fetler for a couple of years, but now they've not bred since yet. I'm pretty sure there's a pair residing on the island somewhere, but you know, you may well get lucky to see a snowy owl or something even better if you do pay a visit. But that's just an awful close-up of this spectacular bird, which very much pleased a Nature Trek group on my last visit to the islands. Okay, so that is a whistle-stop tour of my talk to Shetland. It's a fantastic place. I thoroughly recommend you go if you haven't, not only from the wildlife aspect, but the cultural, the historical aspects as well. So I hope you've enjoyed my talk. Thank you very much for joining, and I will happily answer or try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for all those wonderful photographs, most enjoyable. They're very enjoyable indeed, actually. Well done for keeping talking. I'm sure you're exhausted now.
That's okay.
No, it was lovely. It was particularly nice for me because we did actually go to the Shetlands last summer and visited quite a number of the places that you were talking about. So it was like a trip through my summer holidays. Of course, I only ever recognised the birds that I knew. I didn't know all the others. So next time we go, and there will be a next time, I shall know what to look out for.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, that was very good. Especially, I was so desperate to see some whales, and of course we didn't see any at all. We did see people with some very long lenses sat on the beach, peering hopefully out towards the sea.
In hope, no doubt.
Absolutely in hope. So I've just been sat here all day, freezing to death, looking for them. Right. One of the questions I was really interested in is, were there once trees all over the islands? And is it the sheep that's sort of got rid of them, you know, been nibbling the surface down? And if so, is there a sort of a regeneration program to replant?
Yeah, so I can definitely answer the last point there, is that there is no regeneration program yet. And I very much doubt there will be as well. So sheep were introduced centuries ago. And yes, it was more wooded. If you are on Shetland and you wander around, there are small pockets of sycamore plantations. Of course, sycamore is an introduced species anyway. But yes, it was more wooded, but the wood was used for timber, for fires, etc. And very soon, especially in that landscape, it very quickly disappeared. And now, I say, with the sheep involved, yes, it very much is a one-way street for the trees on Shetland. So yes, you got to head to Kurgård. That's the name. I couldn't remember earlier. Kurgård is the place where all the trees are. One place
with trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. That seems a shame that nobody's interested in regenerating some small areas. It would be interesting to see what it did for the wildlife if you had more trees.
Well, especially the bird life as well. I know I've talked about a lot about the birds this evening, but common birds down here, such as blue tits and great tits, they are a rarity up on Shetland. You know, if you see a blue tit, you've had a good day. Whereas down here, it's of course a garden bird.
Yeah.
And so yes, if trees were to be planted, and with global warming as well, who knows what could turn up and start to breed on the islands. But yeah, I can't see it happening anytime soon.
Oh, okay. It's like, I feel a bit disappointed about that.
Sorry.
Sorry. And are there any endangered or rare species which are exclusive to Shetland?
So bird-wise, no. There are some scarce breeders like the storm petrel, for example. But during the winter months, it's very much the bog standard species, which are hardy enough basically to survive the winters. And because of the habitats, there's only a very few number of birds which do breed on the island. But there is no endemism in the avian world on the islands.
Yes, I imagine that that the wind is very bad up there in the winter.
It can be. Yeah, it can be. I actually follow the Northlink ferries on Twitter, and they're constantly sending out alerts during the winter months. During the spring and autumn, it's usually okay, but yeah, this time of year it can be particularly rough up there.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in their design of greenhouses in people's gardens, were very much reinforced.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, quite impressive. Yes, it's very sturdy greenhouses. I'm not sure that everybody realises that a voe is actually just the word for an inlet or a sea loch. Yeah.
Yeah, a very narrow sea loch.
A sea loch, yeah. Oh, somebody says their great aunt was once proposed to by the lighthouse keeper at Muckleflugger.
Oh wow, excellent. Brilliant.
I read somewhere that the lighthouse at Muckleflugger was the inspiration for Treasure Island. There you go.
I wouldn't put it past it.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, question here. Are the numbers of Shetland ponies staying stable, and do you often see them when you're there?
Oh yeah, they'll never get rid of the pony. That'll be there until the end of time. And yes, no, you do see them dotted about from time to time on the tours. Yeah, absolutely no problem there at all. And we do stop and see them as well. Yeah. Take a few nice photos, etc.
Yeah, they're kind of designed as bred as work animals, aren't they?
Yeah, that's
to
right.
pull little carts and things. Yeah. Somebody said you mentioned global warming a few times. Are there changes you have seen or might expect to see?
Absolutely. And one, for example, is the puffin population. So I'm sure we all know that puffins feed on sand eels, and sand eels are very, I can't think of the word, but they soon spot a change in temperature or feel a change in sea temperature, which means they just move much further north and beyond Shetland up towards Scandinavia, the Arctic Circle, where the seawater is obviously cooler. That's where their food source is. And so in the past decade, the puffin population, especially at Sumber Head, which is roughly 100 miles south of Unst, Hermanus National Nature Reserve, they've seen a depletion of around 50% in the puffin population. And it does vary year on year, admittedly, but that's on average the depletion of the puffin population there. And out at sea, you see different variation in cetaceans that you wouldn't have seen a decade or so ago. White-beaked dolphins, one I've not mentioned this evening, they're now seen with some regularity and in very large pods as well from mainland. So yeah, there are changes happening, pros and cons, I would say, for certain populations. So yes, you do definitely over time see the changes.
I was very stunned going to Sunborough Head and peering over just a low wall, really, and suddenly discovering there's a whole load of puffins just sat the other side. It was quite remarkable.
It's incredible, yeah. No, it
It's
really
it's a
is.
good place to go and visit with Sunborough because they had a very nice cafe in the lighthouse there.
I failed to
So,
mention the cafe. I do apologise about that. So yes, no, it's
very good food at the cafe.
absolutely.
Yes, it's not all complete wilderness. They do look after you on the Shetlands.
They certainly do.
Yeah. A question here. Is it true that there are no stinging nettles?
Oh, there are stinging nettles. Yeah, there are
I would
nettles.
have thought so.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, in the autumn, I spend most of the time in the nettle beds to try and flush out a rare bird or two. If one is in there, it can be a good hiding place for
Oh,
a
really?
rare bird or two. Yeah. Strangely, that's the thing with Shetland. You just don't know what's going to turn up and where it will turn up. So yeah, you've got to plod around everywhere. But yes, there are nettles on the island.
It is a fabulous place to visit, isn't it? I was completely
Yeah.
blown away with it. I did enjoy my visit to Musa, and I did manage to climb to the top of the broch there.
Yes, yes.
The broch is quite interesting because they're very interesting structures because they're huge, I mean really big, but there's these two walls that run on the inside of it, like two concentric circles, and the staircase to the top of the broch goes between the two parallel walls. It's really quite fun to do, actually, and you get a good view from the top.
Yeah, superb structure.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, really. And the nice thing about the broch there is it is nearly complete, and I don't think there is another complete one on the British Isles anywhere.
No, and yeah, they are endemic to Scotland and the Scottish Isles, the brochs. So yeah, they're an iconic feature. And yes, Musa is by far, the most sturdy of them all, and it's stood the test of time so far.
When we were on the boat going over to Musa, the chap driving the boat, steering the boat, said about the bonxies and how they'd been hit by the bird flu. But then he did point out also that was a benefit possibly for the Arctic terns.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there are pros and cons there somewhere. Yeah, so the Arctic terns, they mainly get harassed by either the Arctic skew or the great skew of the bonxie. So yeah, the Arctic terns are fine, but with so many bonxies being hit hard and gannets by the bird flu, of course they lay dead on the beaches, and the first thing to usually get to them is the otter. And bird flu has now been found in a number of otter carcasses on Shetland. So yeah,
that's a disaster.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Who knows what this year will bring? It is a mystery. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How tragic. Sounds really dreadful. Well, let's hope everything improves next year. And yeah. All right. If there's any more questions coming in, do send them in the chat button. I think we're coming to an end now, actually. Matt, I really enjoyed that. It was a real treat for me, and I'm sure it was a treat for everybody else as well. So thank you very much indeed for giving us a superb talk.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. So we have a few announcements now for further events in SANHS. We have another webinar coming up in the beginning of March. On the 8th of March, Steve Parker, who will be known to many of you, will be talking about a trip to Steepholm. So that's Wednesday, the 8th of March. On the 22nd of February, so a little bit closer in time, the SANHS Local History Group are going to be giving a live talk at the Somerset Heritage Centre, and that'll be about the photographer Peter Wickens Fry. Other groups are giving lectures, some of our associated societies. So the Wells and Mendip Museum on the 3rd of March is doing a talk on limestone plants by David Walker. And at Queen's College Taunton on the 8th of March, there's going to be a lecture about the 1917 revolution in modern Russia. So a lot to be going on with there. There's a lot more live events coming up, and that'll be on the SANHS website if you would like to know a little bit more about it. And of course, if you want to join SANHS, which we're always very pleased to have you, just go to the website and all the joining forms are there. So that only leaves me to thank Matt for his excellent talk, and also the webinar team working behind the scenes, Nathanael, Tony, Allan and Emma. And of course, thank you, the audience, for coming. And hopefully we'll see you again at another SANHS event, live or on the website. Okay, thank you and goodbye.